This is AM Joy, June 13th, 2020, 8 a.m.
Bring in our panel back into the conversation. We have with us Colonel Jack Jacobs, a Medal of Honor recipient, Malcolm Nance, author of The Plot to Betray America, The Washington Post, Jennifer Rubin, and Congressman Ted Lieu. Jennifer, let me get your thoughts on something, because there was a moment that was, for me at least, a little bit ironic given what we've seen play over the past couple of days. The president touting, rightfully so, the history of the military in preserving the Union, fighting against slavery in the South, and the fight to free slaves and preserving those who wanted to break this country up. This is the same president, though, who earlier in the week did not want and said absolutely no to the military renaming any Confederate bases to modern names or other heroes of the U.S. military.
Yeah, I think that was one of the many ironies of the speech. The president always reads from a teleprompter like it's the first time he's ever seen those words. So goodness knows whether he understood or even cared if they directly contradict the notion that he is honoring losers who took up arms traitorously so against the United States and whose names are preserved shamefully by bases around the United States. So that probably did escape him. I had three quick points that I took away from this speech. First, I'm going to differ a bit with the Colonel in terms of the quality of the speech. This was just chocked with one cliche after another, one weird analogy after another, bombastic, jingoistic. There was no poetry to it, no elegance to it. I don't think he used the word constitution. And I think this is a typical Trump speech, which he is in love with the bells and whistles, with the tanks and the guns. And this is once again him getting to play toy soldier. Second, it was really remarkable that Trump can make a graduation speech all about him and about his record. And third, much of which he touted simply isn't true. Colonel Wilkerson made clear about the military spending, but it's also true that Trump hasn't ended endless wars. We still have troops in Iraq. We still have troops in Afghanistan. And in fact, he needlessly involved us in a confrontation with Iran, almost creating another war. His bogeyman of we don't do rebuilding is meant, I think, to be a slam at prior administrations. But in fact, what he left out of World War II is after we fought, we helped build and rebuild democracy and save Europe, so it's now whole and free. So I think this was very typical of Trump. And I do agree, however, with the Colonel that he was under strict direction not to go off script. Aside from hamming it up about his birthday, he generally did. And I suppose on balance, I'd rather have a poorly written, crass speech than Trump extemporaneously speaking.
Let me, Congressman Lieu, if I can bring you into this, I want to ask you about another moment that I personally thought, again, a little bit ironic given the president's track record over the past 3 years. And I want to read from the speech itself. This is an excerpt provided to us. He said, quote, "What has historically made America unique is the durability of its institutions against the passions and prejudices of the moment. When times are turbulent, when the road is rough, what matters most is that which is permanent, timeless, enduring, and eternal." Give me your take on that. You're a member of one of the institutions in this country that upholds the democracy in this country. This is a president, though, who seemingly almost attacks every institution we have in this country, at least changing the norms of many of these institutions.
That's correct. But let me first, again, congratulate the new officers of the United States Army, and we all honor them for their upcoming service. Now, in terms of your question, I thought Donald Trump was fine at reading the teleprompter. I'm glad he stuck to the script, although I did think the speech was rather long and somewhat boring. In regards to that specific phrase, the president himself has not lived up to it. He repeatedly attacks the U.S. Constitution, attacks our judiciary, attacks the free press. He goes after our democratic institutions, and that's why it's so important that we have a Congress that is trying to hold him accountable. Very pleased that last term, the voters flipped the House, and then this November, the voters have a chance to vote again in nationwide elections.
And Malcolm Nance, I want to give you a chance as well to respond both to the president there, roasting a little bit, I guess, or, roasting the fact that Navy lost the Commander-in-Chief Cup to Army for the last 2 years. I know you're a member of the Navy. I'll give you a chance to respond to that. But more importantly, give me your chance, give me your reaction to the speech and what you made of it.
Okay, first off, I guess he forgot that Navy broke that record again and is now won. But that's like Donald Trump. He just makes his own reality. Look, that speech, let me speak again as senior enlisted here, because you have a fine wardroom assembled. That speech was dull as dishwater. I mean, it was like a fifth grader's Memorial Day speech from the front of a stage in front of the parents. All it was a series of platitudes, places he's never learned about. He couldn't say, Point du Hoc, where the Rangers scaled the walls off Normandy. It's just like Rangers going up cliffs in Normandy. He doesn't know anything about the Pacific War and Douglas MacArthur and the battle in foot to retake the Philippines or Tarawa or Iwo Jima or Eniwetok or any of those things. My dad was 15 when he served in the Pacific in 1944. Donald Trump even speaking those words is a dishonor to him. But finally, he really doesn't seem to understand that this is not a set piece for his advertisement, which is, you're not going to hear a word out of him in his ads. You're just going to see videos of him saluting soldiers and standing there and looking presidential and receiving a copy of the honorary sword. Look, Barack Obama did this way better. There was nothing to remember from this speech. There was very little for the service members to take away from it. Great, we have hypersonic missiles, so does Russia and China. I'm just glad it's over.
Colonel Jacobs, Malcolm, I appreciate that, and we always appreciate your insights. Let me, Colonel Jacobs, bring you into this conversation for a moment. I want to just square this point and remind our viewers, the cadets were brought back to attend this graduation so the president can deliver this speech. Do you think, now that you have heard that speech, and not to take anything away from those that were graduating, but the fact that their families are there and they're watching this from home, do you think that speech was worth what we just witnessed?
Well, even if it was worth it, we could always watch it on television. In any case, I didn't have to bring all the cadets back. So, I'll do a little riff on Malcolm's observation. It not only was dull and platitudinous, it seemed twice or three times as long as it really was, and without trying too hard to make ad hominem castigations. Despite having years and years of practice, President Trump still can't read a teleprompter. It's just, even if it were a good speech, which it was not, the delivery is just absolutely impossible. If we got a minute, I'd like to bring up one thing he mentioned, which is worth reiterating and discussing very briefly. He made a very sharp distinction between mounting conventional operations against hostile forces on the one hand, and rebuilding countries or building infrastructures and defense capabilities of friends and allies and so on. We should not make that distinction. To a greater or lesser extent, if we want to be safe, one of the things we have to do is to make sure that our friends and allies are capable of defending themselves. And you can't do that just with aircraft carriers and missiles that are really, really accurate. So we can't divorce building the capability of friends and allies with the defense of our republic.
Colonel Wilkerson, I want to give you the final word on this subject. When you kind of look back at whether or not this was worth to bring these cadets, these 1,100 cadets, back to attend this graduating ceremony so this president would have his opportunity to speak to them, the message that he delivered today, from your opinion, was it worth it?
Not at all. I'm glad the other speakers brought that up. The real tragedy of this experience is just what they intimated and what you just intimated. And that is that we did it at all the way we did it. This is in defiance of most of the medical advice that is coming into the administration. It's in defiance of our epidemiologists at the National Task Force for Election Crises, who briefed us the other day that we are in for a second wave that is probably going to make the first look calm. If that's the case, then we are doing things right now to exacerbate, deepen, and make more profound that second wave. And this was just an illustration from the President of the United States using the military academy as a political prop of that very thing. That's the saddest thing about this, in my estimation.
Congressman Lieu, if I can get your thoughts here as well as we kind of wind this conversation down, but do you think over the last couple of weeks that we've seen the way the president has used the military, that staging of that photo up outside of St. John's Church, the apology from Mark Milley, the rejection of the use of the Insurrection Act by the Defense Secretary, has this president undermined the standing of the American military?
Donald Trump has undermined himself. Our military remains great because our personnel understand that they took an oath to the Constitution, not to Donald Trump. And when we see Donald Trump now embracing Confederate images and symbols, that really rubs a lot of people the wrong way. And by the way, all these images you're seeing at West Point, this is the Union Army. We won. We should not have Army bases named after traitors and losers. And I hope that the Pentagon now reverses its decision and has a DoD-wide ban on Confederate flags. Navy and Marines have done it. Time for the Air Force and Army to do the same.
Colonel Jacobs, your thoughts as well. Definitely a little bit of damage control here needed for the military, just given the fact that the president has put them in a difficult situation. What does the military need to do, both its civilian and military leadership going forward, to maintain both the trust and the confidence of the American people?
You know, it's interesting that when General Milley did what he did and then reversed himself and apologized, it was the latter was the smartest thing he could do. We've got 2 million, more than 2 million kids in uniform watching what happens, watching what the chain of command does. They've been imbued with the notion that the military establishment is not for domestic political purposes, and they need to see a confirmation of that. What has to happen now is that the chain of command needs to continue on that line and reinvigorate the military establishment with the notion that it serves the defense of the republic.
Jennifer Rubin, your final thoughts as well. When we talk about where we stand today, following the debate that we're having, both the presence of the military or the National Guard on the streets of America being used, the kind of break in rank, if you will, from both the Secretary of Defense, Mark Milley, and really this debate now that rages on about the use of Confederate names and monuments. Has the military in this country been politicized by Donald Trump in a detrimental way?
I think he's tried to with every fiber of his being. And I think what happened this week is the military said, no, not here, not us. And what struck me, I think, throughout the speech was that the military has been imbued with honor, with dignity, with a respect for the Constitution that Donald Trump is entirely lacking. It's sad, it's pathetic that they have a commander-in-chief that is unworthy of them. They are magnificent. They are the best in America. They do understand their obligation to the Constitution and not to Trump specifically or any ideology for that matter. So I think in a way this was anticlimactic. The best speech of the week was General Milley, who really explained what the obligation of the military is. That should have been the address to West Point. That would have been a speech worth giving.
And last but certainly not least, to our senior enlisted, as he likes to keep referring to himself, Malcolm Nance. Going forward, what do we need to see happen right now, given the debate that is raging on in this country from the military leadership in this country, from these young cadets as they assume their new roles?
I don't think they need to do anything going forward other than doing what they're doing now, and that's maintaining the honor and the dignity of the armed forces, staying out of politics, as General Milley had made clear, carrying out their duties so long as they understand unlawful orders to take to the streets and put bayonets towards American citizens are just that. They have an obligation to disobey unlawful orders, just as they have an obligation to obey all lawful orders. One last thing about the Confederate flags. There is a place for Confederate flags. on U.S. military bases. They're right alongside the captured flags of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the North Vietnamese, and the Nazis. Those flags need to be in a museum showing the spoils of battle against these traitors. Every base needs to be renamed. There are lots of great members of the armed forces, Airman Chapman, Sergeant Chapman, who was lost in Afghanistan, change AP Hill to his name. Fort Bragg, change it to, Fort Gavin, the great airborne commander who jumped in World War II, Jumpin' Jim Gavin. These need to change. This heritage needs to go away.
I want to thank all of you for joining us. Incredible panel. Malcolm Nance, Colonel Jack Jacobs, Jennifer Rubin, Congressman Ted Lieu, and Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. Thank you all for joining us this morning on this very important day. I appreciate your time. And coming up in a late night tweet, Donald Trump posted